Well, welcome, everyone, to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath. Thanks for joining us. Today, I have a special guest. I have Carl Goldman with me, owner of KHTS, the radio station that we're broadcasting from. So thank you for joining me, Carl.
It's so much fun to be on this side of the mic.
Right,
You
yeah.
fire the questions.
So I think I'll do my best to do so. And again, the idea of the show and why I wanted Carl to come on is this idea of really drawing out the personal, if you will, out of personal finance. And I've been talking to guests, old and young, men and women, different walks of life, different professions, whether it be community involvement or certain, corporate involvement, entrepreneurs and everything else. And I'm trying to draw out things that maybe lessons learned, some attributes or, if you will, character traits that have helped and or hurt even as they've tried to build careers and build their financial success. So you've had this station and ones before it, right? Because you've been in this business for a couple of years.
Yeah,
a couple of years.
We're second generation radio. Both our dads said don't do it, and here we are.
And then you did it anyway, right?
Many years later.
So I thought that'd be kind of an interesting, just another interesting angle on the same subjects in a sense. And so commonly what I'll do is kind of let you share your story, kind of what brought you to this point, and then along the way we'll draw out some of those principles. But I mean, things we've talked about in the past were, just perseverance, persevering through the setbacks, and having that sort of grit, if you will, to stick with that plan, whether it's a business plan or financial plan, being patient. Right? We talk a lot, like even just a show I just did with a colleague of mine, Clint Kamua, talked about some of the behavioral things that trip us up sometimes. How we get overconfident, or we just think about what we heard about most recently, and we just kind of hang on that, even though it's not really that true. And what happens when we make those mistakes is we don't let the portfolio we've invested in breathe, or that maybe you invested in a radio station, or it could be anything. So the idea of just being patient and just kind of sticking through and seeing through it through volatile times. So those are some of the things we've talked about on the show in the past. It's been a lot of fun to this point. So I thought it'd be great to kind of hear your story. So you said second generation. So you grew up kind of around all of the...
Yeah, I grew up around radio. My wife, Jerry, her dad was in radio. And coincidentally, and this is how random things are, I ended up working with my wife, Jerry's dad for 8-9 years before I ever met my wife.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So we worked LA radio together. So I came out here to go to grad school at the Annenberg School of Communications at USC. And my dad, who had been in radio, his best friend owned an LA radio station.
Okay.
So this is back in the 70s. I was able to work with the greats there, and
Wow.
no intention of making a career out of it.
It was just a job
Just
to
a
get
way
you
to
here.
pay my way through USC, and got sucked into it.
Okay.
And my wife's story is kind of similar. She needed a summer job. Her dad got her a job at KZLA radio, also back in the late 70s, early 80s. And just came in as a part-time receptionist over the summer to pay her way through school. And same thing. She got sucked into it. We met at a radio network, what became the largest of the radio networks, what's now Westwood One, back in the 80s.
Okay.
And had met, so here I'd known her dad and her mom for 8-9 years before I ever met Jerry. Worked together at Westwood One, and then this radio station was up for sale in 1990.
Okay.
We bought it out of bankruptcy. That could be a story out of itself.
No kidding.
With other partners, and weaved through the bankruptcy. This is 1990. Earthquake hit. They turned it around, made it successful. Earthquake hit in 94 out here. This is pre-social media back then.
I actually remember that.
Cell phones were the size of this table.
Right.
and so the communication, this radio station became the focal point for the community, not just from an information standpoint, but kind of what social media is today, a calming device for everybody, information source. And then we were also feeding things behind the scenes because we were the eyes and ears of Santa Clarita. So we would hear about X happening and be able to communicate that to the authorities long before they did. So that was an interesting time. For those who don't know, the 5 and 14 went down during the earthquake. We actually had more damage here in Santa Clarita than Northridge. However, we didn't have the drama. Other than the 514, it wasn't too exciting to show a crack in the foundation of City Hall or the Auto Club building.
And I remember the Auto Club building leaning about 2 feet over, and it was like, oh my gosh.
but there wasn't as much drama as down there. So we were on an island unto ourselves.
Literally, yeah.
Back then, commuting, about 70% of the workforce were commuting out of here. We really were a bedroom community back then with 130,000 residents. Today that's reversed, but back then there was, it was challenging because you couldn't get from our valley down to Los Angeles.
So, not that you did this with intent, but you became this. It was like, in some sense, a perfect storm, then for KHTS, in that you guys became like this single primary source of information and communication throughout the community, whereas you would not have had that strong of an opportunity, at least not that concentrated of an opportunity.
And it's a good example of local ownership versus national ownership. So we competed. Our main competition back then was a radio station called Magic. It was out of the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
They were on FM and we were AM. They were able to position themselves as, quote, the Valley station because they could be both San Fernando Valley and Santa Clarita. They had an adult contemporary format, which at the time was the best format to have for the target audience we were both trying to go after. And so we had to find our own niche against them by really focusing and being hyper-local and also putting on an oldies format, so it was different. When the earthquake hit, their ownership was back east, and they didn't react. They didn't understand what was going on.
Right.
And so they chose to not really do full coverage, and really their local management were handicapped and handcuffed. So by the time they finally figured it out, which took many, many, many days, everyone was already glued to us, and they never could recapture that. We were all earthquake all the time for 5 months, and they could never recapture it. Even if they did try and capture it, their challenge would have been they wouldn't have been hyper-local, so they would have had to communicate. And the information was very different for people in San Fernando. So it's just a good, interesting example.
They had to, for them to get any information, sort of boots on the ground in Santa Clarita, they couldn't even get here for a while, right? Because the bridges were down.
Exactly, which is why local ownership and living and work, if you're going to buy a business, moving into the community, which was the decision we made. We did not live in Santa Clarita before buying the station.
Well, now you say you came here to go to SC. Did you come here from another part of California or from out of
No,
state?
I grew up on the East Coast, New York, went to college in Massachusetts. My wife was from here. She was from Northridge. But neither of us had any intention of moving to Santa Clarita. We chose that when we knew we were able to buy the radio station.
What's interesting to me, too, is that when you think back to 1994, because I remember I was in college, and I was going to Pepperdine, but I lived here because my job was here. So I would commute, right? So the bridges were down. So I had to take the 126 to the 118 with that windy road. It literally took 2.5 hours one way to go to Pepperdine. And my professors wouldn't give me a break. So I still had to do it. So I pretty much was gone like 14 hours straight. So it was crazy. But when you think about Santa Clarita at that time, and you kind of alluded to it being more of a bedroom community, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as we stand today, we're the third largest in LA County, population-wise.
Yeah, and the other secret that most business people don't realize is that for every job now the commuting out of the workforce is about 30%.
Okay. As
opposed to 70% back in '94. And for every job that is leaving here in Santa Clarita, of that 30%, 2.5 jobs are coming in here. Right. So we have more people commuting into Santa Clarita than commuting out of Santa Clarita. Of course, the 14 freeway and the 5 are jammed because you've got everybody from the Antelope Valley commuting in and either working here or down in L.A. And that accounts for a good chunk of the pressure points.
The repairs on the freeway probably don't help for the moment, but we'll take it because we're going to get something out of it in the end, I suppose.
Right.
But, So you guys have been here since then, give or take 1990.
Yeah, and then just to quickly add to the story, the Communication Act in '96, Congress changed that. You can suddenly own a lot of different radio stations. Wall Street got into the mix, and we had a bubble. We being the industry had a giant financial bubble. Big companies like Disney, Viacom, Clear Channel were all gobbling up stations. And Clear Channel came in and bought us. We sold it. So we sold it in 98 to Clear Channel. They turned it into KISS
Oh, I didn't realize that was a connection there. Okay.
They turned into KISS AM. We had other investments and stations in the Antelope Valley and over in Ventura. So I was traveling back and forth. My wife wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Our kids were young. That lasted 23 minutes. And for those who know my wife. And so Clear Channel kept it. The dot-com crash hit at the end of the century there, 2000. And Clear Channel, in order to save, and there was no more stations to gobble up.
Right.
Wall Street started putting pressures on them, so they looked to consolidate themselves, and they ended up moving the radio station up to Lancaster with the stations they had up there.
Okay.
And they might as well moved it to another state. And again,
You
it was
that
outside,
hometown kind of feel.
Yeah, it was people in San Antonio, Texas, were making a decision here because they looked on a map and saw, oh, Lancaster's right next to Santa Clarita.
Right.
We've got 5 stations up there. Let's
Sure.
go ahead and just merge it up there. And so there was no longer any station here, and eventually it failed, and there was nothing left. They were just simulcasting KISS FM on it. So fast forward 2002, we decided we would buy it back again.
Okay.
This time without any partners. So my wife and I bought it. We finally purchased it in October 2003 and turned it on the air.
So it's 15-year anniversary then of that coming
Exactly.
up.
Coming up at the end of this month of October.
Yeah.
It will have been exactly 15 years the second time around.
Yeah, right.
We had 8 years the first time around. So it's been a 28, 29-year stretch now with it. When we turned it on the second time, coincidentally, there were fires from Simi Valley raging, and the whole west side was being evacuated. We had put up a state-of-the-art website there, and the city asked us to go on with emergency coverage. We did. Evacuations took place. Back, if you had the time machine, you went back to the major news sources.
Right.
The newspapers were not putting hard news on the internet. We were one of the first. And so as we put the fire information on, the city put a link to us, College of the Canyons put a link to us, Hart District put a link to us, every realtor in town
So you sort of got it into the interwoven throughout the entire
Right, and it's like the old cartoon where the light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
So that it's saying it's taking opportunity. I think the lesson from that, what we learned is when the dust settled after the fires, we looked and we said, "Holy cow, we're not in the radio business anymore. We're in the information business." And the strategy that we had for the radio station in competing with Magic and the LA stations of being hyper local, doing traffic from the Santa Clarita perspective, not worrying about a SIG alert in Ontario, covering high school football, interviewing the mayor, doing the 4th grade book reports, being there for an emergency, whether it's a traffic light out or a truck overturning on the freeway or whatever it was. Being hyper local, we found we could take that same strategy and apply it to the digital side, to the website. And then that's when we launched the daily emails and this is all pre-social media, pre-Facebook, pre-Google even in 03. And then Google came around. We were one of the first Google news sources. So we really evolved to today. Our website, we're getting close to 300,000 unique visitors a month to our website. Probably 45-50% of the adult population are coming to either our website, to our emails, to the on-air side. So it's really, really evolved.
Multifaceted.
Multi-funneled, as we call it. Now with social media, we added this year, we got lucky and were able to put an FM on the air that simulcasts the AM.
I got to ask you, we can do that later. I want to know how that came about, but we can come back to that.
Of course.
But finish your train of thought.
So I guess the point is being there at the right place at the right time. And then back then, there was no roadmap. No one knew what was going to happen digitally. And so it was a lot of trial and error and falling. I guess it's the best analogy I always give is when I was younger. Now I do it a little differently. But when I was younger, if I didn't fall on the ski slopes, I love to ski. And if I didn't fall on the ski slopes, I wasn't pushing myself hard enough.
Nice. Okay.
And so that was the analogy. You have to take some falls on the ski slopes to do it. It means you're not pushing it. And so that's kind of how our digital side came about. We'd have 10 ideas that were creative. We'd throw them all out up and test them.
Like a brainstorm.
And one or two, well, we test them, and one or two would be really, really good, and 3 or 4 of them would be very, very stupid ideas, and another 3 or 4 may have been a little ahead of the curve. Mind you, it's changing. Either a little ahead of the curve, or the energy that it needed to put into it wasn't worth the return at the time.
Okay.
So we kind of shelved those ideas and would say, hey, this is a really good idea. It's got some legs, but now's not the time to do it because of X, Y, or Z. It just was going to cost too much in either actual finances or in manpower.
Just the return that you can get on it today.
Or the audience wasn't ready for it, too. We had a lot of ideas that we threw out that, hey, these are great ideas, and later they became good ideas, but the audience has to catch up. Your consumer has to catch up to the product, too. So there's a mixture. But if you don't try those, you're not going to know which one is the right one and which one isn't. So we bet on a lot of different ones, and then obviously the ones that did work, we stuck with and continued with and put a lot of resources on and fine-tuned and made mistakes with it. But today it's allowed us to have a very, very, very strong digital presence.
Well, it seems to me, and if you apply this to whether your personal finance or just personal finance, the idea of the words that are coming to my mind are being adaptability and flexibility. Because when you first, back to 1990, go back to the front of that, you had an idea, you had partners, you had a business plan, obviously. You had,
of course,
you'd been in the business, so you kind of knew how to structure that for this industry and so on. So you had your roadmap, such as it was. You probably look back at that and kind of chuckle now because it's evolved like so many times over. But even then when you came back the second time, you had the ability to develop kind of, hey, what I learned the last time, I'm going to adapt, I'm going to redo it this way, plus times have changed. But it sounds like along the way it was changing, which is normal, but it was changing quickly, and it was changing in ways you couldn't, by definition, because you don't know the future, could not see. So it sounds like a willingness, and there's a couple of things that come into my mind. Well, adaptability, courage, the freedom. I've heard authors say the freedom to fail, or failing forward was another term I've heard. So the idea that, hey, we're okay with that,
right? Because
we'll get to the other side. But I think a lot of times we need to, when we look at our financial plans, not just our investments, but be willing to try something, be willing to adjust to something if times have changed, and kind of work with it from there. So that might be something we could kind of unpack in a minute.
And the other analogy, I did skiing. I don't surf, but surfing's a good analogy too, where you want to catch the wave and hit that sweet spot and follow the wave. So you want to be kind of in front to catch the good wave and be on board and ride that good wave. But if you're too far out in front, it's challenging. And a good example of that are audio podcasts. When that first came out, we saw the light bulb, but we knew this was going to be great. We invested a lot of time, energy, resources into podcasting, but we were too far ahead of the curve.
Okay.
And we failed with it to begin with.
Okay.
But we still believe, we know podcasting is going to be a giant funnel for both the radio station and for everybody. It's going to be major. So
But you have some infrastructure now.
So so we have the infrastructure. We understand it. We're continuing to invest at both time and money and ride the wave so that we continue to be on top of it. So when it hits that critical mass, we're in the position to just jump and have it work. And with that, we're also following our same strategy all along, and that's to be hyper local. We can't compete with Google. We can't compete with KNX down in Los Angeles with an LA radio station against a small mom and pop like ours. We can't compete against Amazon or Google or even now the big iTunes in terms of the big podcasting.
So I would ask you, do you even need to?
No, you don't. That's what I'm saying. You can just be hyper local and focus on what we do best and what we know best. But I guess the point I want to make is we could take that same strategy that we've had since 1990 with our traditional airwaves and apply it to everything else.
Okay. Well, let's cut right there because I want to come back to that. And we'll take a break real quickly. You're listening to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath on KHTS FM 98.1. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath, here on KHTS AM 1220 and FM 98.1. I actually have a special guest with me today, Carl Goldman, the owner of said station, KHTS. And we have been talking about just, if you will, the backstory, kind of how this all developed, how this came about in our town of Santa Clarita. And we left off with this idea, or talking about just the willingness and the word that keeps coming to my mind is courage to adapt, to be flexible, to invest in things, not necessarily knowing, right? So it makes me think of even when you're investing in a portfolio, I don't really know what Apple's quarterly report's going to be, right? That kind of a thing, but you do your homework, you do the best you can, and you're willing to make those adjustments. And you said at the end, you want to ride the wave, use the surfing metaphor. And the idea that sometimes you can be, and you're trying to avoid being too early. There's a kind of a joke, I think, in the money management world that if you're actually a stock picker or a money manager and you're wrong, it's sort of tongue in cheek, but you say, well, I was just early, meaning I was just too right. I was so right that I was in front of all you. So we kind of we say that all the time as a joke. But I think the idea that coming back to that, so you guys have invested in infrastructure for the podcasting world. As that still kind of, would you say that's still more in its nascent stage? Because they're
it's
everywhere.
Totally in its infancy. It's totally, well, what's happened is it's burst, so there's a million podcasts
that's
out
what I
there,
mean.
but there's
no connection to any of them.
There's no road to profitability yet. So you've got a lot of people out there doing a lot of different things, and there's a few that have been very, very successful, few out front. NPR, National Public Radio, in our business has been the most innovative and out front with it, and have had some major successes with it, but right now it's few and far between for giant successes. But there are successes, and there are some good success stories.
It sounds like almost like there's a bunch of little league ball players out here, and maybe one or two of them will play Major League Ball, but the other 99.9% of them may play high school, and that's about it, right?
That's a good analogy. But it's a new industry, and it's great, and the regulations are not as challenging as streaming and others. So what's good about it is it's kind of an open field, and I'm a firm believer of letting things go out there and let the market dictate and decide what's going to stick and what isn't, rather than regulating it. And podcasting is a good example where it's not really regulated. So a lot of different people, whether it's
good news and bad news, I suppose, right?
So there's a lot, it'll go through its challenges, and we'll see what surfaces. Whereas a lot of other things like audio streaming, for example, this show's being streamed on our website and on our phone apps. That's highly regulated, and the government stepping in there has really quashed innovation on the streaming side because there's no clear road to profitability on that yet. Under their regulations, even if you do succeed.
Well, now, speaking of regulation and developing different sort of ways of getting the stream out there, if you will, the station added this year the FM handle, if you will. So tell me, how did that come about? Was that part of a premeditated plan from the beginning, or did just an opportunity come
wish.
Up,
well, we've always wanted an FM, and because of the proximity to Los Angeles, it was impossible under old laws to put an FM in. We've looked creatively since 1990 to do it, and there was never any opportunity for anybody to put a commercial FM station in Santa Clarita, just because there's not enough frequency room up there. And a few years ago, the FCC, as AM was struggling, the FCC decided to, the FCC being the Federal Communication Commission, they put in something called the AM Revitalization Act. But in order for that to work in a place like ours, it's one thing if you were an AM station out in Boise, Idaho, with lots of room and not lots of frequencies, so they could make it work pretty easily. But in the major metropolitan areas, particularly Los Angeles, where we're so oversaturated with the frequencies, we had to have about 10 alignments of the stars all lining up together at the same time. And so there was a short window to allow this to happen. The FCC only gave us a short window. Opportunity happened. We stayed vigilant with it. And so it was a combination of luck and being at the right place at the right time with the right resources. Same thing going back to the earthquake. It wasn't, there's a combination of luck being at the right place at the right time with everything lining up. And that's what happened. So we were able to put 98.1 on the air February 1st. It's what's called a low-powered FM.
Okay.
It has to broadcast what they call simulcast. So everything on the AM also goes out on the FM. We can't have two stations.
Right.
Out
So
of
same
that.
content, same structure.
Same content.
Yeah.
And it just fills in Santa Clarita. But, of course, FM has a higher quality. It reaches areas the AM can't, and vice versa. So it's nice because our AM reaches places the FM can't.
Oh, okay.
So, such as the AM's very, very strong still up in the Antelope Valley, and for the commuters, and the FM really doesn't pick up till about between Aqua Dulce and Acton. So they're good companions to each other.
Okay. So you mentioned comparing that to the time period of the earthquake. And almost, I would add, the time period when Comcast was in a position of needing to sell. I mean, all of these kind of represented opportunities. So the theme I'm hearing kind of throughout this is this idea of, I mentioned earlier, being adaptable or flexible and is adjusting to the situation. But I'll add to that, it's also being ready, right? Like, for example, I had a client of mine who was forever looking for a vacation home. And so we'd worked through all the financing, got the pre-approval letters, had the money set aside for the down payment. We did all the homework we could do. And then they're looking and they're looking and they're looking. They want a certain specific thing, right? So it's taking forever. And I kept saying, we need to be ready because when it starts, it's going to go like wildfire. So it's like kind of like this hurry up and wait forever. But when the opportunity strikes, it only strikes for those who are really prepared, right? So it's not an opportunity unless you actually have the ability to take advantage of it. So one of the things sounds like you guys did was always be ready. And you don't always even know what you're being ready for sometimes, right? The earthquake, obviously, we didn't know. But this notion of, hey, do your homework, get ready, whether that's defined as financially, just the structure of the business and the staffing, all of the stuff that you needed to get ready. So when an opportunity came up, you could actually take advantage of it, especially in that last one. So if they gave you a short window and you had to catch up to it at that point, you probably wouldn't have made that happen.
Right.
So I think of this, again, I'm always applying it in my mind to, as we just generally handle finances, and the lessons learned would be just constantly be ready. So we talk about the basics of having, I always call it the slush fund, a little bit of money in the bank just in case, the transmission goes, the roof starts leaking, just have a little cash. So the basics of that, a certain savings rate, how you invest, having the risk being equal to the return and equal to the risk you can tolerate, and having all of those discussions, you're just ready. And then someday down the line, I'm thinking of just some person, just hypothetically, an opportunity to move out of a career into another comes up, but you're financially ready. You may not have known 5 years ago that opportunity would be there, but you've just kind of stuck to your guns the whole way through. And so in your case, been willing to adjust along the way. So I would turn it back to you. A question I would ask is, so being an entrepreneur, not just a radio station owner, if someone was coming to you, sitting with us today, who wanted to start a business or make that part of sort of their, for lack of a better term, their portfolio, they want to invest in that. Maybe it's a franchise or something. And not to put you on the spot, but there could be 1 or 3 or 5 things. What would be the things you think would be most important for them as they set out to take on that endeavor? What were some things you learned over the years that you would want to make sure they knew?
Yeah, I think some of my takeaways have been, and I've already talked about some of them, but I think having a good partner. All of us have great assets, and recognizing what our strengths are, but also more importantly, recognizing weaknesses. So in my case, I'm visionary. I'm out there. I like to go out. I'll become best friends with someone on the elevator, and I can talk a good game.
Okay.
And so I can come across well out there. I love going out and selling the station. I love being involved. I love the community. Love getting up and talking in front of people. My wife's the exact opposite.
Okay.
She, in fact, it took a long time before you could get her in front of a microphone. It took years and years and years.
Ironic being in the radio business, right? I guess.
Yeah, well, she had that experience with the nuns in Catholic school. That's a whole other story. But I'm a horrible manager. I'm not good one-on-one with people. I'm great in a group,
Okay.
and I can lead, but I'm not good stopping down and filling in the blanks.
Okay.
She's real good with that. You know,
Okay.
she
So you
comes from the accounting
complement
side,
each
and
other.
right.
Yeah.
She's great people person. She can sit down with the staff. She's got the patience to really do the hand holding. So we complement each other, and it's understanding each of our strengths, and more importantly, understanding each of our weaknesses.
Okay.
And then stepping up and handling it from a different standpoint.
Right.
We work on different floor. If we worked in the same office, that would be a challenge. We wouldn't be. Yeah, we would not be married still. But working separate offices, understanding it, getting coaching from the outside, because that also is very, very important. In our case, Alex Urbina, who hosts a show with us, landed in our lives about 7-8 years ago, and can provide that extra perspective to let us see the, step outside and see it from a different, see different possibilities, work through some of the challenges. So those would be two important things. One is find someone, understand your strengths and your weaknesses.
Right.
Find someone, it doesn't have to be a spouse, but someone who's complementary to it. And then find someone outside who's a neutral person who can coach you, or at least who you can go to and get a different perspective, because it's too easy to just get caught up and not see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and I think that in thinking of, and even if those listening are in more of a corporate structure, that's the value of a good manager, like an Alex Urbina. Doesn't have to be an outside consultant necessarily. It could be just someone that you can sit down, have an honest conversation with, and let them. But I think one thing.
But it's got to be someone who's neutral, someone who doesn't have a vested interest in whatever.
That would not be true all the time with a manager. That's probably true.
Whatever you're doing. So that's why what we've learned is, and I think most good corporations that have succeeded are able to do it. Most entrepreneurs are able to do it. And you look at some of the great tag teams. I refer back to the Disney and the Empire. They did. If Walt was left to his own devices, Disneyland and Disney never would have happened. And Roy Disney on the other side didn't have the vision. Roy was my Jerry. And I was much more like Walt, where you jump in and grab the shining object and try things. And risk things, and Roy was the one bringing it back to reality and say, can we really afford to do it? How do we do it? Roy was the one to manage people. Walt couldn't. And so it took the two of them, and I'm sure both of them had those outside consultants also feeding them who could be neutral, particularly if they got in a fight with each other, which I know, having read their bios, they've had many a fight.
I've done the same,
many a fight. But I look at them, and that's a great example, even following a dynamic personality like Bill Gates or the Apple. They all had jobs. They all had someone to balance them out.
It's almost like one partner gives wings to the other, but the other one keeps the first one on the ground, in a sense, right? There's kind of a balance there.
And out here, I look at, we just finished celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Michael Hoffman Foundation.
Right.
Well, that started with us, with Jerry and me and Chris and Sue Hoffman.
I didn't know
Michael
that.
was still alive. The first dinner was in our backyard. And Chris Hoffman, Michael's dad, was like this rocket ship that you couldn't control. He just had all this energy and burning need and the passion, and you just had to ride it, but you had to guide him, because if it wasn't guided, if we couldn't ground him and guide him and hold him back with certain things, it never would have happened. It took the team of us and all of the strength and mixture of all of our personalities to make that foundation what it is today here in Santa Clarita.
Well, I think that requires of all participants to talk about strength and weakness, whether you're talking about a nonprofit like Michael Hoffman or a big company like Walt Disney or fill in the blank, the KTH radio station.
KHTS, yeah.
There's a need. There has to be a willingness to be humble about the weaknesses, but confidence in the strengths, right? It's kind of you have to have both sides of the coin. Because if you're not humble to you have weaknesses, then not you personally, but just in general, then you have problems, right? You have a despot on your hands. So
even we're getting to we're politically we're in a weird situation right now. But if you go back historically during our lifetime to me, two of the most effective presidents, whether you agree with them politically or not, were Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Both of them had personalities that you have to have an ego to be president. You have to be confident to be president. But they were confident enough in themselves to be able to change and correct their mistakes. And if you go back historically, both of them had disastrous first 2 years. They both circled themselves with people that they were both governors. They both circled themselves with their friends who had no business and no idea of how to run Washington. In Clinton's case, he brought Hillary into the West Wing and did that whole health plan. That was a disaster. Reagan made many, many mistakes. They both had the midterm elections and had a rude awakening. And they were strong enough in their own and confident enough in themselves to realize they messed up and made major, major corrections, and some tough corrections. In Clinton's case, he threw Hillary out of the West Wing and put her in the East Wing to be first lady and forget the other stuff. And Reagan brought in a number of, throughout a lot of people and brought in others. And so I think part of that is being secure enough in yourself to make the mistakes, understand your weaknesses, admit to those weaknesses, and then be willing to make that correction. The presidents that have had challenges going back, Jimmy Carter and a number of them, Bush even to some degree, couldn't make those corrections. Obama could not make corrections that he should have had he been smart early on.
It's a tough balance. I mean, admittedly, especially when you're in the hot seat like that, where everyone's looking at you and poking at you and criticizing you and that sort of thing. When you're an entrepreneur and you're running a business, you don't have that kind of pressure. You may have some financial pressure, if the bank's calling on you, but at the same time, I think as we kind of look at investing in a company or just kind of building our general financial story and our financial net worth, is this notion of know your strengths and weaknesses, have the humility, I call it maybe confident humility, perhaps. You're confident where your strength, maybe you're really good at making money. I've had a recent client who is certainly capable of managing their financial affairs, and so we kept talking, and finally at the end of it, I had to ask, I said, can I just ask you why I'm here? So, I mean, we all know that you can do this, so why do you need me? And the answer was, I'm really good at making money, but I don't have that much interest in all of this other stuff. I just want to go do what I do well. So he knew his strengths, but also knew it wasn't a lack of ability. It was just lack of interest. So I kind of knew where I fit in there. I'm like, okay, great, I can do that. But there was a confidence. It wasn't that he was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do all this stuff. It was more, it's like me with my car. I'd rather hire someone to change the oil than go through the mess myself. So being self-aware, maybe we'll put it that way. So that would be one of your big lessons to someone starting out. And
investing, I mean, we made, you started the show by talking about mistakes. We made many mistakes, many mistakes, long list, but certainly when it came to investing in real estate, we made a ton of mistakes. We met, the crashes in when we first moved here in 91 with the savings and loan crisis. Certainly this last round in 2008, we didn't see. And had we seen it and been smart about it, what we've learned is just be patient and ride it out. Don't try. So when it comes to investments, it's riding it out and then being positioned when it does crash. And we know at some point real estate's going to crash again. It's going to happen. It may not crash like 2008, but it's going to. We're going to have a recession. The housing prices can't continue the way they are. But they're also going to come back. So it's being in the right place at the right time and being smart enough to hold your investment during the tough time. Don't panic and don't get into that risk aversion and sell right away. Hold it. Be in a position to be able to take advantage of it by maybe buying another property when the prices dip. And don't necessarily try and second guess it to when it hits bottom, but when you think it is.
And that's that adaptability, I think, at the same time, be willing to go. So I think we're going to take a quick break real quick here. This is your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath, on KHTS AM 1220 and 98.1. welcome back, everyone. You're listening again to Mike McGrath and your Money Path with Mike McGrath with my guest here, Carl Goldman. As we kind of conclude, a couple thoughts came to mind as you were talking this last segment about the idea of giving lessons to someone starting out. We were saying an entrepreneur, but I was saying anybody just starting out financially. Having an awareness of your strength, accentuate them, right? But also the humility to recognize weaknesses and get that support, maybe with a partner, whether it be a spouse or just a business partner, or just surrounding yourself with people who are better at you at those things. And that takes a lot of confidence. But you also mentioned the idea of a coach, and it kind of hit me as you were talking that I think that's generally where a good advisor comes in. So a lot of times where you have a client, they're just trying to stick it out, trying to do the right thing with a portfolio, and they get kind of panicky. Like my last segment we talked about, or my last show, we talked about, behavioral biases, right? So and I mentioned that earlier in the show. They get the better of all of us. So advisors aren't immune to it. So we are human nonetheless. But the idea of having someone who is objective to come back at you and say, no, let's talk about that plan we built together. Are these still your goals? Is this still your time frame? And so on and so on. Hey, I think we're going to be okay. And put things into, as we talked to at the last show, context is everything. And I think that whether you're talking about a business decision to, invest more deeply in podcasts in the future, or you're just talking about sticking to your guns and finishing out what you started for your financial plan, it's the same thing. And having someone there to just kind of encourage you. We used the analogy last time of a personal trainer, which I could probably use. But we know that it's not that it's complicated to lose weight. You eat less and exercise more, barring a health condition, that's probably the best way to go, right? But it's not easy to do, right? So because you go home and my daughter will make dessert, and I don't want to turn my daughter down, right? So I'll have some, and so it's harder to actually implement. And I think that's true when we talk about financial planning with folks. So, and it's true when you're starting a business. It's easy to get distracted. You guys have had the success of using, I wouldn't call them distractions, but use those unexpected events like the earthquake, like the opportunity to buy the station back, and really invested in that strongly, and we're ready for it. So that preparation is key. But also saying, hey, along the way, we'd kill each other if we didn't have a coach to kind of give us some perspective.
And support, you really have to build a village. So whether it's a support from a financial counselor, obviously we have a CPA, we have a couple of lawyers, we have a business lawyer who's here locally, but in our business, there's so much regulation. We also have to have a good FCC attorney who's back in Washington.
Okay.
And then from a technological standpoint, we've got great consultants when it comes to the technological side, whether it's the website or our server. We can't do it all. We can't know it all. Yeah. And it's just what you said about taking care of your car and turning it over to a professional mechanic. Right. You need to build a good team of people you can trust who not necessarily are your employees, but have their specialties and be able to access them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think we in this independent society, we always think, I can do this myself. No, and it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's just because you're normal. So you need other people around you. So, and I think, the way that we would look at that, not everybody is going to hire the same person, but you want to hire the group of people that can handle the different aspects, in your case, law and different accounting and different kind of things. With us, the same thing. We have people who specialize in law and accounting and taxes and so on, to really build out a team for a client. So I tell you what, as we wrap up real quick, I wanted to, so if people want to get onto the station, right? So it's not KHTS.com though. That might be a misnomer.
No, it's Hometown
Station, all spelled out.com.
Right.
And of course on the radio dial at AM 1220 or FM 98.1. And if you want to reach me, Mike McGrath, you can reach me through our firm at epwealth.com/Valencia. or at facebook.com/EP Wealth Advisors. So with that, I will let Carl go. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. This is Mike McGrath with your Money Path with Mike McGrath on KHTS 98.1.